The sun was not yet cruel that day. It hung low and soft over the prairie, pouring its gold over every rooftop, fence post, and horse's back. Dust lifted gently from the main street of Dry Creek, the kind that never quite settled, just wandered. The air like old memories. Some mornings in this town felt like a photograph you could step inside of. The way the wind hummed through the telegraph wires, the way the church bell sighed instead of rang, the way folks' boots clicked on the wooden boardwalk, carrying them toward the same places they always went. In that slow-moving picture, there was a girl named Clara Make. Lara had the look of someone who knew the weight of silence, not the awkward kind, but the deep, familiar kind you get used to when no one's asking questions and you've stopped offering answers. She wasn't plain, not really though. Some might. VA said so, because she didn't fight for attention. She wore her hair in a low knot. Her dresses faded not from neglect, but from washing them too well. When she smiled, it was never quick, never careless. It was the kind of smile you earned. She worked in her aunt's boarding house. That meant mornings started before the rooster was done clearing his throat, and nights didn't end until the last lamp upstairs went dark. There were pies to cool, linens to scrub, boots to line by the door. The men who came through Dry Creek, drovers, peddlers, rail hands. They noticed the pies, but not the girl who made them. Children liked her, though they followed her into the kitchen to steal biscuits. They leaned against her skirts when they were shy around strangers. Clara had a way of kneeling down to eye level and listening to the small things they said, as if they mattered as much as any headline. People whispered she's 24 and never courted. Such a shame. Her mother gone so early. Must be she's waiting for the right one, or maybe no one at all. Clara didn't argue. She let them think what they wanted. The truth was simpler and sharper than anyone guessed. She had never been kissed, not in the shy way children sometimes are at barn dances, not in the stolen corner behind a church social. Not at all. One afternoon, she said it out loud without meaning. Toit was too little. Maggie Hargrove, who'd been sent by her mama to fetch a jug of milk. The child was chattering about her older sister getting engaged, how they'd kissed under the apple tree, and wasn't that just the most romantic thing? Clara had smiled, setting the jug into Maggie's small hands, and said softly, "I've never been kissed." Not once. The words hung there, like dust in a shaft of sunlight, catching every quiet particle in the air. Maggie blinked up at her, with the unfiltered honesty of children. Why not? Clara didn't have an answer that would make sense to an enrolled. Or maybe she did. Maybe it was because no one had looked close enough to see her, truly see her, and she wasn't about to go asking for it. That evening, a stranger came to town. The stage rolled in slow, its wheels grinding over loose stones, horses tossing their heads against the heat. He stepped down without hurry, a tall man, hat brim shadowing his eyes, coat dusted from the road, not handsome in the storybook way, but carved from the same weathered patience as the hills beyond town. Clara noticed him without wanting to. It was the way he stood still for a long moment, as if letting the town size him up before he moved. His gaze passed over storefronts, hitching posts, the well in the square, then landed on the boarding house porch where she was sweeping for a second. She thought he might nod, but he didn't, just walked on toward the saloon. That night, a different sort of man sat in the dining room. He was a drifter, boots too shiny to be a working man's, smile too quick to be trusted. He ordered pie and coffee, made some remark about her eyes. Clara set the plate down, murmured thanks, and moved on to the next table. By the time she returned, he was gone. The pie Keaton coins left scattered like an afterthought didn't sting, not anymore, but it confirmed what she already knew. She was a face folks passed on their way to somewhere else. The next morning, as she carried a tray of biscuits from the oven, she saw the tall stranger again. He was on the far side of the street, speaking to the blacksmith. The sun caught his profile, jaw rough, with days-old beard, eyes narrowed against the light, and for the briefest instant, as if he felt her glance, he turned. She nearly dropped the biscuits. He didn't smile, didn't wave, but he looked at her hands, steadying the tray, and held that sight for a heartbeat longer than strangers usually do. Then the blacksmith said something, and he looked away. That night, Clara lay in bed, listening to the quiet ticking of the wall clock somewhere far off. A coyote called. She thought about the stranger's eyes, the way they didn't skim over her, the way most men's did, but she told herself it meant nothing. Dry Creek saw many passers-by, and most left without leaving anything behind. Still, in the stillness, she found herself wondering what would it be like to be seen. Not just noticed, but seen as something worth slowing down. Fourth wind rattled the window frame. She closed her eyes, and somewhere in her dreams, a man in a dust-covered coat stood under the prairie sky, not speaking, just waiting. The boarding house smelled of coffee and wood smoke that morning outside. The frost was melting off the fence rails, drops falling into the mud with soft, steady taps. Clara was pouring coffee for the sheriff when she heard the door open behind her. She turned, and there he was, the tall stranger from the street. Same dust on his coat, same slow step. He removed his hat at the threshold, almost like stepping into a church, not polite in the flashy way, but in the quiet manner of someone who'd been raised on the notion that doors and women deserved respect. Her aunt bustled out from the kitchen, flour on her hands. Rooms open upstairs, she told him before he could ask. Meals at 7 and 6. Water in the basin. He nodded once, reached for his pocket, and laid the coins on the counter in a neat stack, not thrown, not slid, but placed. Clara took the keys from a hook and led him to the narrow staircase. His boots made a measured sound on the steps. No hurry. She caught a faint scent of cedar and horses as he passed in the hallway upstairs. She unlocked the corner room. It had a small bed, a window facing the morning sun, and a washstand with a chipped pitcher. He glanced around once, set his hat on the chair, and said simply, "Thank you." His voice was low and steady, with a weight to it like river stones, shaped smooth by time for 3 days. He was just a presence, came down for meals, took his coffee black, never lingered in the dining room after. Sometimes she'd hear him on the porch in the evenings, boots on the railing, whittling something unseen. He tipped well, but so quietly she often found the coins after he'd gone. It was on the 4th night, when the rain had been tapping at the windows since afternoon, that he spoke more than 2 words to Hurst. Just brought out a fresh pot of coffee for the few boarders still downstairs. He was sitting alone near the hearth, one leg stretched out, firelight flickering over his face. He looked up as she passed, then gestured toward the chair across from him. "You can sit, if you like." She hesitated. She never sat with the guests unless invited by her aunt, but the room was quiet, and something in his tone felt like an open gate rather than a demand. She set her apron on her lap and sat. The conversation moved the way a creek does, slow, winding, with pauses that didn't need to be filled. He asked about the town, the boarding house, the weather in winter. Never once asked about her family or her life. He seemed to know that some questions were gates that shouldn't be pushed open too soon. When her aunt called from the kitchen, Clara rose. He nodded, as if to say thank you for the company, and she found herself smiling without meaning. 2 small things began to happen after that. The next morning, she found the porch step mended where it had been splitting for weeks. No one had seen him do it, but she guessed 2 days later. She noticed her Bible on the parlor shelf had been set upright and dusted, the one with the pressed wildflowers between the pages. She wondered if he'd noticed them, wondered if he knew she kept them as reminders of the one summer she'd thought love might find her. One evening, the fire burned low and the other boarders had gone to bed early. He sat at the table with a cup of coffee, staring into the flames. Clara was wiping down the counter when his voice came, quiet, almost careful. "You ever been in love?" She froze for a moment, then shook her head. "No." He studied the fire for a long while, the light catching in his eyes. Then she heard herself say, as if the words had been waiting for him alone, "I've never been kissed." The rain outside hushed for a moment, as though the whole world had leaned in to listen. He didn't laugh, didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't offer some easy charm in response, just nodded once, like a man who'd been handed something fragile. and looked back into the fire after that. Nothing seemed different on the surface, but inside her, something shifted. She found herself lingering at his table a little longer. When bringing his meals, he asked if she liked walking, and one late afternoon she caught herself wishing he would ask her to join him down the street. The town noticed, in the way towns do, a glance here, a whisper there. Mrs. Calloway at the Mercantile leaned close over the counter and said, "That new boarder's a good man, but I hear he's just passing through." Clara nodded, but inside she felt the pinch of that word. Passing it was like trying to hold water in her hands. One morning, she saw him outside, saddling his horse for a ride. He wore his coat against the wind, collar turned up. She stepped onto the porch to shake a rug, and he glanced her way, really looked as if to fix her in his mind before swinging into the saddles. She told herself not to hope, but hope, she'd learned, was like the prairie grass. Even after fire or frost, it always found a way to grow back. By late March, the wind had begun to change. It came warmer now, rolling over the prairie grass like a sigh. After a long season of holding its breath, you could smell the river in it, and the faint sweetness of wild sage waking under the sun. Clara noticed other changes to the stranger, whose name she'd learned was Elias Boone. Had stopped being just another boarder. He'd become part of the rhythm of her days. If a chair wobbled, he fixed it. If the fire needed feeding, he was there before. She asked if she dropped something in the kitchen. She'd find it set neatly on the counter later. Cleaned and mended. It wasn't grand gestures that marked him. It was the small ones and small things she'd come to believe could fill a heart the way steady rain fills a wealth. A moment that settled it in her mind happened on a Thursday afternoon. Shay was out front sweeping the boardwalk when two men from the livery passed by. They were laughing about some ranch hands wedding, and one of them, half drunk on his lunch break, called out, "What about you, Clara May? You waitin' for someone to blow through town and rescue you?" The other laughed harder and added, "Careful. She'll be an old maid before that happens." Her face burned, but she kept sweeping before she could respond. A quiet voice came from behind her. "Some flowers take longer to bloom, and that makes them rarer." The men turned. Elias stood there, arms folded, eyes steady as a winter sky. He didn't raise his voice, didn't step forward, but something in the weight of his words made the laughter die. The men muttered and moved on. Clara kept her head down, but her heart felt like someone had just wrapped it in both hands to keep it from breaking. The next week, he asked if she'd walk with him to deliver a package outside of town. It wasn't much, just a parcel for the preacher's brother who lived on a small spread by the river. She hesitated. It had been years since she'd walked out past the last row of houses with a man, but she said yes. The morning air was crisp, the sky pale as washed linen. They didn't talk much at first. His stride was steady, and hers matched it once. He pointed out a hawk circling far overhead, its shadow drifting across the grass. Another time, he handed her a sprig of wild sage, without saying why. When they reached the small cabin, the preacher's brother invited them in for coffee. Clara sat at the kitchen table, listening to the two men talk about cattle and river levels. It struck her how comfortable Elias was in any room, not because he tried to be, but because he didn't try at all. They started back toward town in the late afternoon, the sky blushing at the edges. That was when the wind shifted again, sharper this time, carrying the smell of rain before the first drop fell within minutes. The clouds rolled heavy over them. The downpour came sudden, hard, drumming on the earth and soaking them through. Elias scanned the horizon and nodded toward a weathered barn not far off the road inside. It was dim and warm with the smell of hay and horses long gone. They shook the rain from their coats and found a place to sit on a bale near the wall. The roof rattled with each heavy drop, the sound like 100 small drums keeping time with their breathing. They talked then, not about the weather or the chores waiting back in town, but about smaller things, softer things. He told her about the mare he'd had as a boy, the one that would follow him without a lead. She told him about the summer she'd tried to grow roses behind the boarding house, and how they'd all turned brown, but she kept the dried petals anyway. She laughed at one of his stories, really laughed, and realized it was the kind of laugh that didn't make her self-conscious. It was a laugh that felt like coming home when the rain softened. He reached over without thinking and brushed a bit of hay from her hair. His hand lingered for the smallest moment. Her breath caught for a heartbeat. She thought, hoped, that he might close the space between them. Instead, he drew his hand back and said quietly, "Let's start slow." She didn't know whether to be disappointed or grateful, but the words settled deep in her chest, like a promise made not in haste but in care. They walked back in the soft, dripping quiet after the storm. Neither spoke much, but the air between them was different now, charged, expectant. When they reached the edge of town, she almost wished the road were longer. The next evening, a rider came to the boarding house. He handed Elias a letter, rain-spotted from the ride. Elias read it once, then folded it slowly, his jaw tightening. Just enough for her to notice. He slipped it into his coat and said nothing Clara wanted to ask. But something in his stillness told her the answer would come when it was meant to. For 2 days after the letter arrived, Elias Boone was quieter than usual, not withdrawn, just listening to something far away, like a man catching the sound of a train before anyone else hears. Ith still came to meals, still tipped his hat when passing her in the hallway, but there was a shadow in his eyes now, something she hadn't seen before. Clara told herself not to pry, and yet, every time she heard boots on the porch or a saddle creak outside, her chest tightened as if bracing for good bite. Was Mrs. Calloway, of all people, who told her, "Heard he's leaving." "Dear," she said in that low, eager tone she used for sharing news, "got a ranch up north, needs running. They're saying he'll be gone by weeks." And Clara's hands stilled over the stack of plates she was drying. She nodded as though she already knew, but the truth was her knees felt like they'd forgotten how to hold her up that evening. After the supper dishes were washed and the lamps turned low, she found him at the stables. He was checking the cinch on his horse, a coil of rope resting over the rail. The sky above was bruised purple, the first stars beginning to wake. "You weren't going to tell me," she said. He didn't startle, didn't turn right away. "I was going to," he said finally. "Just not yet." She stepped closer, her boots crunching on the straw. "Why not yet?" "Because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me something." Before I left, her throat felt tight. "Oh, you." He kept his eyes on the saddle as he spoke. "You've been honest with me, Clara May, more than most folks are in a lifetime. I didn't want to take more than you were ready to give." She stood there for a long moment, the night air cool against her cheeks. "Then," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to be heard over the crickets, "I am ready, Elias, not for you to leave, but for me to live." He finally turned to face her. Even in the dim light, she could see the question in his eyes, the kind that asked for truth, not just words. She took a step closer. "I don't want to wait another year, another season, to feel what I've been missing. If you're going, then let me have this before you do." The air between them seemed to hold its breath. Elias reached up, slow as sunrise, and took off his hat. His hair was flattened where it had rested, the gesture leaving him looking somehow younger. Unguarded. "Let's start slow," he said, "but let's start now." His hands came to rest lightly on her shoulders, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. Kiss was not the quick, thoughtless thing she'd feared her first might be. It was gentle, certain, warm, like the first sip of coffee on a cold morning, or the way sunlight feels when it finally breaks through after days of rain. Her heart beat against his chest as though trying to catch up with the years she had gone without this. When they parted, the night felt different, not louder, but fuller, as if the crickets themselves had leaned in to listen and were now satisfied. She laughed then, soft and a little breathless. "I can't believe I waited this long." He smiled, a small thing, but it reached all the way to his eyes. "Worth the wait?" She nodded yes. They walked back toward town together, his hand finding hers without ceremony. The boardwalk lamps cast their shadows long, and a few folks glanced up as they passed. No one spoke, but Clara could feel the surprise in the air. the way news would travel by morning without a single word being sent the next day. Elias didn't leave. The letters still sat folded in his coat pocket. But when she asked if the ranch up north was expecting him, he said simply, "They'll manage. Without me for now." She didn't press for more. Some things, she thought, didn't need explaining when they could be lived instead, and so the days went on. But not the same. There was still work, laundry to be scrubbed, floors to be swept, meals to be served, but there were also evening walks past the edge of town, and quiet talks on the porch after the lamps were turned low. Sometimes they spoke of the future, sometimes of nothing at all, and sometimes, when no one was looking, he'd tipped his hat back just enough to lean in and kiss her again. The narrator's voice might have ended here, but it had one more truth to tell. Love doesn't always arrive loud or fast. Sometimes it comes like a horse in the distance, steady, sure, taking its time, and when it does, you realize it wasn't late after all. And that, friends, is how Clara May's first kiss was worth every year she waited. If you've ever waited for something that came slow but stayed true, tell me in the comments, and tell me, where in this wide world are you watching from tonight?